Hello and welcome to MedCity Invest Digital Health. My name is Orundhati Parmar and I'm the editor-in-chief of MedCity News. So all of you probably already know that last year was a record year for digital health investment. And this year so far, in the first half of the year, we've already raised $14.8 billion. So we're probably on track for a record year again in 2021. But I wanted to get a deeper sense of what's next in terms of digital health investment. Where is the money actually going? Who are the startups that are being successful in this area? So for that, we will turn to our panel. So we have Rachel Ford Hutman. She will serve as the moderator. Chris Garabedian, founder of Zontogeny, Michael Greeley, general partners with Flair Capital Partners, and Steve Toll with HLM Venture Partners. Rachel is CEO and founder of Ford Hutman Media, a communications firm that provides media relations, thought leadership, and executive visibility to life science companies. Clients range from venture-backed startups to large cap public companies. Welcome to Rachel, and thank you so much for sponsoring this session. Chris Garabedian, founder of Zontogeny in 2016, to support multiple promising technologies from early development through clinical proof of concept. In 2017, Chris joined Perceptive Advisors to develop their venture fund strategy and launched the Perceptive Zontogeny Venture Fund in 2018 to support early stage companies. Welcome to you, Chris. Michael is a co-founder and general partner at Flair Capital Partners, a leading healthcare technology venture firm based in Boston. Michael serves on various innovation and investment advisory boards, including that of Advocate Aurora Health, Boston Children's Hospital, Cleveland Clinic, and MedStar Health. He also serves on the Governor's Digital Health Council and the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative. Welcome to you, Michael. Steve Toll is a general partner with HLM Venture Partners. He brings 30 years of commercial healthcare technology expertise in the areas of strategy, business development, and product management. Steve has spent his career helping to develop and manage some of the most important themes in healthcare innovation and investment today, including AI, diagnostic imaging, medical devices, electronic health records, population health, managed care, and value-based pharmaceutical pricing. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Rachel. The audience, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and Rachel will weave them in as she sees fit. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Arundhati, and thank you to you and MedCity News for putting on this panel. I think we can all agree that in our environment right now, these types of virtual events are more important than ever. So thank you so much. So let's jump in. A reporter actually asked me a few days ago, he was like, what is behind the crazy valuations in digital health right now? And I thought that would be such a great question to start off with, because obviously I have some of my own theories, but I would love to hear from each of you. What are your thoughts behind that? And are we near a market top? Chris, maybe we could start off with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think what we've been witnessing is what has been described as convergence, right? We're seeing maturity of technology and a kind of fusing of how that technology can be applied, not just in the drug space, but how the med tech space, right, can aid and augment therapeutics and what is commonly described as health tech. And I think it's a feeling that these technologies, as they converge, are going to be very disruptive to the broader healthcare system. And I think you're starting to see the valuations and the interest in betting on some of these technologies really, kick up in recent years. So I think it's really I guess a confidence level that we're actually going to see new technologies be disruptive in the healthcare arena over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's some great points. Steve, anything to add there?
I think it all comes down to new entrants in the investing space. Call it the Tiger effect, and you can blame the Livongo transaction on this. But you've got big deals now that are attracting people who historically haven't done healthcare investing, and then they've got strategies that are very specific to their goals to put a lot of money to work very quickly. And so we've seen a lot of valuations go sky high. And at the same time, you've got a very active SPAC market, which is giving companies a new path, or I guess it's not new, but it's new now, a new path to go public. And you've got a lot of SPACs that have a 2-year window to go find a target. So we're going to see a lot of ongoing activity, including M&A activity, for the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael?
Yeah, so Rachel, I think I'm at risk of sounding a little schizophrenic. So your question is, are we at a market peak? Is it too frothy? I think some of the multiples are clearly out of line when you look at on a trailing basis or even on a 1-year forward basis. It's hard to see 30 or 50 times next year's revenue as being a reasonable price. But when you look 1 or 2 years past that, I think these valuations start to look more sane. As early stage investors, we wrestle with paying enormous pre-money valuations for companies that are effectively pre-revenue. And the reason why I may be schizophrenic is then I pause and I say these end markets are so extraordinarily large. We've seen this phenomenon in other industries that get re-architected, and really big, enduring, important companies get created. And so, I come at this environment cautious, but actually quite optimistic. And I think Steve's right. There are capital market forces at work that I think will continue to accelerate the exit momentum that I expect we'll see over the next couple of years. I think a provocative question is, last year we invested as an industry $14 or $15 billion. Year to date, we're at $14 or $15 billion. Are we on a pace to do 30 billion this year? And I'm not sure we're on that kind of pace, but clearly I think we'll see well over $20 billion invested in this category this year. And probably, I was looking at the Rock Health data, year to date through June, there were 372 companies that were funded in that data set. My guess is we'll see, probably close to a doubling of that, maybe 550 new companies. And so your question has multiple answers. It's on a purely multiple basis, you would say, yeah, this is very frothy. On a size of market and number of companies being invested in, it feels quite reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me just respond to something Michael said, because I think coming from the drug investment side, what we see in drug valuations is that if you have a early clinical data set, you might be 6 or 8 years away from that drug actually getting approved and generating revenue, but you can see a company like that trade in the billions of dollars of value. And historically, that has not been the case with devices, diagnostics, any kind of health tech. You have to prove that you're generating revenue. And I think what you're seeing is almost the drug type of valuations coming to early cutting edge technologies where people are saying, hey, look, there's only going to be a couple players standing at the end of the day. Which ones are going to be the next? Let's take the tool space, the next Illumina, right? Trying to say, hey, I think this is the right team. They have the most mature technology, and they might not even have generated revenue off that or have driven a lot of collaborations, but people are starting to ascribe a lot more value if you're early and you have a technology that's perceived to be adopted quickly into the healthcare system.
Absolutely.
Can I reply to that, Rachel? Sorry. And some may have heard me say this. I think Chris is absolutely right. If you look at other industries, so I'll pick on advertising, over the last 20 years, an enormous wave of new companies, value creation. I think you can credibly say $10 trillion of venture-backed market cap was created. Healthcare is 13 times larger. The dominant players in ad tech today, Google, Facebook, Twitter, were started 20 years ago. And so I think there's a sense of urgency now that over the next handful of years, the companies that will be enduring are being funded today. And if you look at it through that lens, whatever we pay today is relatively inconsequential, not to sound cavalier. If you're backing something that's going to be a category leading company in the next 20 years. And so I think Chris's observations are absolutely spot on. I think we'll get into the conversation. What's the lesson for entrepreneurs that are just starting today? And how do you fund that trajectory? But I wake up every day why I'm so enthusiastic about our space. To me, there's a sense of inevitability that investors today, entrepreneurs today, are building companies that will be enormously important over the next 1 to 2 decades.
Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to add there, given your time at IBM Watson Health?
I think at the end of the day, for early to mid-stage companies, doing a Series B, the thing I worry most about is that the multiples are probably not sustainable, right? So the entrepreneurs, while I agree with what's been said in terms of market size and number of companies getting funded, we're typically doing Series A, B, sometimes C investments. When an entrepreneur falls in love with a high multiple doing a Series B, they're not thinking that they got to grow into that number. And they're setting themselves up for potential heartache and setting their investors up for heartache. So I think that gives me pause. At some point, we have to see some reality sink back into the multiples that people are expecting.
So Chris mentioned a second ago confidence in the future of healthcare, and it reminded me of last week. I had my first teledoc appointment. It was just a complete mess. Took us like 45 minutes to finally get on the chat. Once I talked to the doctor, everything went great. It was like 5 minutes in and out. And he says to me at the end of the call, "Teledoc's a great company, but they cannot do technology well." And I had to bite my tongue from laughing out loud. I'm thinking to myself, my goodness. And to your point, Chris, are we maybe a little too confident in the future of healthcare? Everyone's talking about how virtual health is here to stay. And I guess that's my question for you guys. What is getting you excited for the future of healthcare? And what are maybe some of the challenges that we might be, a little scared that we still have ahead of us?
I'll venture a guess. So first, I think the comments about focusing on what success looks like and not thinking about all the failures. If you go back to the .com era, right? Everybody's thinking a company might be the next Amazon, and not thinking, for those who were around then, the pets.com, right? That were these retail type of websites. And so I think that you have a similar phenomenon here. It's really hard to predict which ones are going to be the ones standing and having an influence, but I think there is a general feeling that these new tools and techniques, that we are in kind of a renaissance stage where things are maturing and converging at seemingly just the right time, where the need is great. We're seeing this with drug technologies as well, with new antibody technologies and new genetic technologies and CRISPR and gene therapy, and they're maturing very rapidly, and they're starting to turn the corner. I think, though, broadly in healthcare, while I think the idea of digital therapeutics is still nascent, I think more are giving credence to the idea that the digital landscape will transform diagnostics, that COVID has accelerated a lot of these trends to the expectation that these will move toward the home and remote-based capture of information, and maybe via a smartphone, to capture, like you suggested, a teledoc taking a picture of a skin lesion and sending that in. Or now you have similar, we invested in a technology that takes a picture of your throat and can differentiate between viral and bacterial pneumonia. We're seeing a lot of technologies that are looking at voice detection, or looking at the eye and taking a picture of the eye and trying to diagnose things. So I think you're going to see more of this person-based, home-based, remote-based capture that will drive diagnostics and other healthcare information. And again, I think the Livongo trade was mentioned. And I think, everybody sees the telemedicine companies as the natural acquirers for some of these telemedicine. So that's a big area. We've seen it in early AI machine learning. We've seen proliferate in early drug discovery. I think the area that is tougher to think about is how it disrupts clinical trials. And I think people are expecting that the old way of capturing clinical data is going to go by the wayside with new technologies, to whether it be wearables or capturing clinical information that can be correlated to old methods that you would have to go to the clinic once a month in a clinical trial to get that type of data.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a couple things excite me. One is that healthcare is so big and some of the problems are so massive that, if you look at substance abuse disorders as an example, as a fund, you could invest in 2 or 3 different companies in the same fund because they're really not going to compete with each other because the market is so big, the problem is so big that you're going to have a winner with multiple investments. So, the sad part of that is that we have such a big problem to solve, right? If you look at virtual health as a phrase, I think it's going to end up being a hybrid model. Some things will be done remotely, some things will be done in person. But I think what we've learned through the pandemic is that some of this will persist. So at the beginning, it was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? What was most important for your survival as a health
paper.
Yeah. Deliveries from the liquor store. I don't know, but what enabled you to survive the pandemic? And then and now we're going to figure out what's really going to persist. And I think what persists is patient engagement. What persists is behavioral health because there is such a massive shortage of providers. And so I think we have, as investors, have to think about, yes, things have been accelerated, which is great for some of the companies that we've invested in or ones we wish we invested in. But what persists long term? And I think that's the key for us.
Yes. And my next question is which ones you wish that you invested in? Spoiler. Michael, anything to add?
No, I risk being somewhat redundant. I do think the system, I'm hesitant to kind of pass judgment on the category because I still think we're in the top half of the first inning in many ways. The system, we all know, needs to be more intelligent, predictive, anticipatory. As we begin to multiplex new and novel data that Chris alluded to, I think it enables that. And so as a firm, we've gotten very excited about solutions that further that trend. Just in the middle of this call, my Wi-Fi, I got a note that it was sketchy. We're so early in this being a robust set of solutions. What I'm pleased to as we think about it, the risk we take is really product market fit. For the most part, these products will work, and I think we all understand the need is acute, and we've got a long way to go. So, but I think we've never been, and I hate to say this, given how many people are struggling so much with COVID. As a category, we've never been more excited because we see the needs are so apparent. And if the risk is product market fit, those have just revealed themselves in very painful ways.
Yeah. So this next question I know is tough, right? But tree of trust, what were some of the areas and even companies, if you want to mention them, that you really wished that you would have invested in that you're just beating yourself up about? Chris, you want to start us off?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I think that the jury's still out on a lot of technologies. But, look, I think the adoption of telemedicine and the acceleration of that with COVID, nobody would have anticipated. I remember an anecdote from the head of Brigham and Women's Hospital, and she described it as, Lori Glimcher, described it as, or I'm thinking of Dana Farber, Betsy Nabel is the head of Brigham and Women's. And they described that they went from, I think it was like a dozen telemedicine visits the week before the COVID shutdown to like 8,000 from one week to the next. And so I think that clearly had a profound effect of the training, the willingness, the adoption, now more than a year and a half of, experience, I think forever changes the way, healthcare is delivered.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Michael?
Like Chris, I think it's hard to name specific companies. I think there were some, kind of household name companies today that we had opportunities to invest in 3, 4, 5 years ago. We were overly sensitive, perhaps, on valuation. And I think the lessons for us, as I said earlier, is if you really feel like it is an enormous market coupled with a really compelling team, you hold your nose without being silly. But you create a financing strategy. For instance, you build a big enough syndicate that can go multiple rounds to protect the company from having to go out too early. I think there's some strategies we can talk about. But we regret missing some of the what are now category leading companies. We happen to have a number of them, so we're pleased with that. But I think the lesson for us is respect that these are important problems that need immediate solutions, and they're very large. And so just for us, we all look at the same funding data. I would say today there are probably 1,000 or 1,500 entrepreneurs today trying to raise money in this category. How do you find the best of that group and give them the resources to build big companies? And I don't think you can look at it as this specific financing round. It's the whole journey.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, come on, Steve. I know I've heard you say specific ones before.
I would have said Be Well, but we ended up getting Be Well in the Series B. I think we looked at some chronic kidney disease companies. It's a space that I think is just perfect for innovation. We were hoping to get into the Cricket transaction. We didn't get into it, but I think that's an interesting company. And substance abuse. Again, we've recently made an investment there, but we would have easily done another investment in another player because it is such a big problem. So I think those are the two areas that I wish we had been able to do a little bit more in.
Yeah. So a question from the audience. They want to know, conversely, where you are planning to invest in the future and what excites you right now. So maybe Steve, I'll come right back to you.
Yeah, we're investing out of a $230 million strategic investment fund, and our focus is going to be on Medicare and Medicaid populations. And so we're looking at areas of chronic disease that are specific to those populations. So you're going to look at maternity and diabetes and substance abuse, behavioral health. So those are areas where we've invested historically and we think are still important areas. And patient engagement is always going to be an important area, especially in a population that's hard to engage with. So if anyone's got a solution that really has proven success, I think they're going to be a winner. And then we're looking at digital therapeutics. The challenge there is not necessarily that they work, because some of them are actually starting to show that they work. The question is going to be, do payers pay for them, and how do they manage the complexity of medical policy and prior authorization? But there are some really interesting behavioral health digital therapeutics that have enormous promise. And I think we'll be looking at those pretty carefully. Now, whether they're companies or whether they're point solutions that should be part of something else is really the issue, I think, for digital therapeutics right now. But you could argue that there are going to be a bunch of these companies that then eventually have to consolidate over the next couple of years. And what's your investment strategy or thesis around that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, I would say, I mentioned already the idea of diagnostics and kind of remote-based data that can be captured. I think, already you're seeing a lot of antigen at-home tests for COVID and suggestions that folks can monitor, for new variants, that even the vaccinated can get infected. So that's one thing that if you think about even, monitoring, glucose, even for non-diabetics that don't have a CGM, right? They have, wireless apps that you can, look at your glucose and link it to your diet and the exercise and all of that. We saw the proliferation of the Virtas of the world, right? Which kind of suggested a keto diet and to manage type 1 diabetes. So I think that is just the beginning of a trend toward more, consumers monitoring their own healthcare at home and integrating that with kind of a digital app. And how can you apply that to diagnostics that I mentioned? There's a lot of different ways that you can collect information at the, at home or at, a remote-based point of care that doesn't have to go into a hospital or a clinic to have that done. So that's an area that intrigues us. I think the other one is, we're very interested in how the CRO, the clinical research organizations, which is hundreds of billions of dollars, still relying on the old way of getting patients to go to a central clinical site, using methods to capture information. Let's take pulmonary function and having them put on a kind of a mask that's tied to a computer and inhale and blow out and capture all of these things. Are there ways that we can move toward wearable technologies that could be supported in a cloud-based analytical tool where you have algorithms that separate the signal from the noise? I think we're trying to monitor and track how will these replace and displace the old way of doing clinical research, and how can we accelerate the adoption of these digital biomarkers as the true clinical study endpoints that can garner an FDA approved device or a drug. So those are two areas that intrigue us a lot.
Yeah. Michael?
I would add, and I'll try not to be repetitive, I think there are some specialty virtual care models that we're very excited about. We are an investor in Somatis, the kidney care one, and Steve's absolutely right. The impact you can have on these patients' members over a couple of years is really profound. And so we closed a new one yesterday, a new investment in another virtual care model. And I think you'll continue to see us make investments in kind of deeply vertical, focused on populations that have just struggled through the traditional care modalities. Another space that we're spending more time on increasingly is around automation, RPA. We invested recently in a credentialing company, a team we knew very well, around trying to automate elements of workflow and workforce intelligence. And we all, as we talk to providers, so much of that is poised to be automated, especially now with resource constraints that they're really struggling with. And so we'll hopefully do more around intelligent automation in those environments.
Yeah. So a bigger question for a second, I'm sure there's a ton of entrepreneurs that are listening to us right now. So, what are some common mistakes that you're seeing entrepreneurs making? And it doesn't have to be specific to just COVID right now. I've definitely heard a lot about how, everybody wants to make it COVID everything. But you feel free to add in maybe just some bigger picture thoughts, some things you've noticed over the years with entrepreneurs, common pitfalls. Michael, maybe you could go first.
Maybe I have a really tactical one, which we're all so fatigued with this format, and it just doesn't lend itself well to conveying the team's depth and competency, and companies all start to look the same. Maybe investors all start to look the same, and so I think as we start to creep out of our caves, to make every effort to try and make a personal face-to-face connection, even if it's at a parking lot. Mm-hmm. And so I worry, given I think our sector has a little bit of a top of the funnel issue. As I said earlier, I bet there are 1,500 people right now trying to raise capital. So the funnel constricts very quickly. Getting through that top part of the funnel, the way you break through is you have a personal connection, you build a really strong team, and it's hard to convey that in this format. Now, I've already made 3 new investments this year, which is a lot for at least for our firm. And so I do think an interesting question will be to look back 5 years from now and say, were we making good judgments on team? But it is really hard to bond and appreciate the depth of the team in a half-hour tile format like this. And we all know that, but I think we're at the point 18 months into it where we should all be more creative about how to get out of this format. Yeah,
I totally agree. I was in Boston in person last week, and it was amazing seeing people.
Come and see us?
It was a quick one, Michael. But it was seeing people in person, and those natural conversations. It just totally it's so invaluable.
I'm very empathetic for entrepreneurs who are trying to get in front of customers and clients. Just it's the same phenomenon. So I think there's something there. You can be a first mover by figuring that out.
Yeah.
Let me just share a counterpoint on that one, because I have to say, since COVID hit, the productivity of me and my team has gone up easily 2 to 3-fold. And a lot of that is because the old way that we would engage a company would be one of my senior associates would have an old-fashioned phone call with some slides on the screen. And then if it passed our internal review, then there might be a conference call with the phone speaker on a conference. And then we would be looking at their pictures on a website, and we would be arranging for them to fly into the New York offices of my parent company, Perceptive, and we would trade business cards and shake hands for the first time. And after an hour, we would say goodbye and say, we'll get back to you if there's any follow-up diligence. Now, we have at least a half a dozen interactions, getting to know the team, not meeting them in person, but actually really immersing ourselves and feeling like we can develop relationships during the diligence process through these new tools. The other thing is just forums like this. Yesterday, I was on 2 separate panels, on one today with MedCity Invest, and then Monday I have one, an annual meeting of New York Bio. Now, in the old way, I would never be able to reach as many prospective entrepreneurs, people who would learn about us. I traveled like crazy before, but it was very inefficient. And I'll just give another example. I attended in the same week a virtual conference in the Netherlands, and later that week a virtual conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. And there were hundreds who attended. And I don't know that I would have gone and flown out there to those conferences. And I definitely wouldn't have spent a whole week to attend both of them, likely. But so I do think that there are a lot of advantages to what we've learned through COVID. Yeah, I'm not saying we don't have some incorporation of in-person, but I do think that, to Michael's point, that sometimes the entrepreneurs are not as savvy. I would also say that some have shown their utility and versatility by being able to shine on forums like this, where some of the old school entrepreneurs are really not very adept at it and haven't kind of grown up with knowing how to be adept at communicating a story, using the slideshows, right? Driving a good diligence conversation via Zoom. So it's just a counterpoint. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't go back to some level of in-person, but I think it does take a hit on productivity.
Well, and I have to give you kudos, because I listened to you on Clubhouse a few months ago, and I really enjoyed listening to you on a panel. And I remember telling one of my friends who I was trying to talk to get onto Clubhouse, I was like, I don't think I would have been able to hear so many amazing speakers I could not have done that otherwise. Probably I couldn't have afforded to go to, Fortune with their $40,000 ticket prices. Right. So anyway, I do remember you doing that, and I really enjoyed it. All right. Enough butt kissing. Steve, entrepreneurs, what mistakes do you often see them making?
I think I agree with try to figure out how to target your potential funding source better. Do your homework up front before you reach out to a venture firm. Try to come in through a trusted name and entity, because otherwise you're going to get lost in the mix and waste your time. So that's number one. Number two, we've seen recently a lot of companies loading up on convertible debt before they really go out to do institutional money, and they're getting way ahead of where the company is. And it's a way to survive, but it shows a level of unsophistication. So I think I would suggest that get advice from people who've done this process before. Get a mentor. Get out there and have someone help you understand what this institutional investing world looks like before you load up on stuff that's going to convert in and dilute you into nothing. And then I think the productivity on the virtual side of the house has been phenomenal. We did 6 investments in the last year. That's a huge number for us. But I hate looking at myself on Zoom. So I think, the sooner we can get back to some hybrid approach where you get to meet some people in person, when it makes sense, I think it will be great.
Yeah, I totally agree there. So I got a lot of flack from my friends that we don't have a female investor on this panel. And I want you guys to know I tried. just dates weren't working out and all of that. But I want to ask a question in regards to female investment, since I'm the only lady here. I was listening to Chrissy Farr recently on a podcast, and she was saying that a lot of female investors don't want to bring forward female focused technologies because they don't want to be seen as just doing that because they're the only lady in the room. And so she said they end up going the other way in her experience so far, where they are trying not to bring those technologies forward. And I was curious what your thoughts were on that. Steve, maybe you could start us off.
Yeah, we don't have a female investment professional on staff right now, though at some point we hope to fix that. But the company was founded, one of our founders, the NHLM, was Judy Laurie. We have invested in female-led businesses. We have a number of female CEOs. Kristen Valdez, who's the CEO of BeWell, did a podcast recently with Lori McGraw. And on the podcast, she said that she gets asked a lot of the time what her husband does for a living, which, that allows her to be the CEO of this startup. And she said it blows her mind because she guarantees me no male CEO's ever been asked that question, right? So I think we're looking for the right investment in the right market with the right fit. And so we're clearly hoping to find investments where we can invest in female founders and female-led businesses. It's a great different point of view that we have to embrace as investors.
Yeah. Michael?
I mean, obviously, it's hard to disagree with anything that you or Steve said. Was your question more around femtech as a category?
Yeah, more around femtech, but just about how we can promote diversity in general, what we can maybe do better. Because it was hard for me to find a female investor. Obviously, it's a small pool. And because it's a small pool, the few that I knew all had conflicts today. So just in this panel arrangement, I saw like, wow, we need more chicks out there.
Yeah, no, it's super unfortunate. We should have rescheduled the panel it's a multi-day conference. We should have found a better slot because it's a critical voice and it's not on this panel, frankly. I think your question, just to pause on femtech, we have a handful of companies that are femtech. We love the category. I do worry there's a little bit of rush. I think the CB Insights, one of the data services, has logo slides of 50 or 60 logos now. So there'll be the arm wrestling around how they all differentiate. But I think it's a very important category. We often talk to a number of payers and try and get a sense of what their top dozen or so spend categories are, and it's clearly one that's very close to the top. We have a company we started called Kayaba Care with a brilliant set of founders. One is obviously a woman founder, and we think we're seeing incredible impact just in the last 8 months that we've been partnered with her on impact on prenatal postpartum issues. So I think we all respect it as a big unsolved need.
Yeah, let me comment a little bit on this because I'm not sure. I'm not as close to the tech side of things, and I don't know if it's more male dominated, but I can tell you in the drug venture world, in fact, you mentioned Clubhouse, Rachel. I did a panel, not necessarily intentional, but some of the leading VCs. It was an all-woman panel, and so when I think about it, included Sarah Naeem, who leads the venture fund for Avoro Capital, included Julie Papernek Grant, who is the senior partner at Canaan Ventures. It included Camille Samuels, who is one of the partners at Venrock. And just yesterday, I was part of a panel that was called Equalize. It was for all women entrepreneurs. So a pitch contest that culled out, from hundreds of women-led companies. There was a whole pitch contest of the winners of that. And, we supported that. So I do think that, and I have, one of my senior associates and most senior associate on my investment team is a woman. So I think that it is changing. It's unfortunate that we're still picking on, this was an all male. Nobody's saying that if it's an all female, they think it's contrived, and it's not necessarily contrived. But I think that the consciousness level is definitely up. and appreciate that even a woman moderator is called out, right, for all male panel. But I think all of us now are aware of this, and we're actually going out of our way to try to find and promote and champion women in the healthcare space. So appreciate the comments, but I experience something different in my kind of day-to-day, week-to-week experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so question from the audience. This is from John Birch. He wants to know, what influence will Verily, Amazon, even Apple have on the startup landscape? Steve, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's interesting. These big tech companies who set up these healthcare groups and now are dispersing them out within the bigger mothership. I actually think it could be a good thing, because with my experience at IBM was, at some point your P&L gets so hard to manage and the expectations are so rich that as a healthcare only division within a huge multinational global company, it's hard to move the needle enough. Yet, if you could break it up and put healthcare back into this massive organization in areas where the P&L is a little bit easier to manage, you actually are going to promote productivity and promote innovation. So I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing to see some of these large healthcare divisions, get sucked back into the motherships. I think it'll be positive long term.
Yeah.
Implicit, Rachel, is in your question, are we holding hope that they're going to be, ravenous acquirers of our companies? Is that the implication?
If you're reading between the lines, probably.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. I mean, I think there'll be like spectacular one-offs, but I'm not seeing yet the pace and volume of M&A activity that they account for. But I do think it raises the visibility and the importance of these solutions. And Haven, when Haven was disbanded, there was kind of an instinct like, oh my God, they can't make this, even they can't make this work. And so I think that was a little bit of a setback for the narrative of our sector. But we're not investing with our fingers crossed that only Amazon or Apple are going to buy these companies. I would say there's some sectors, some subcategories that they cast a really large and dark shadow over, like maybe the wearable space now. At least we'd have a hard time getting our head around that, given some of the incumbent leverage they have in the market.
Yeah, I'd say this is where we see a lot of the convergence on the tech and traditional drug investors. And, I think that we were skeptical on the drug side that they had these lofty, sweeping narratives and that they really didn't understand drug development. And I think there's been some humility, but the ones who persisted, and Google has really, pivoted and re-engineered, and they had multiple strategies. And Calico was something they did, has a partnership with AbbVie, and it's been taking longer than they anticipated. But I think they're weathering through. And I think one notable one that has done a good job is A16Z. They recognized that they wanted to find partners for cutting edge technologies, much of it in the tool space or early detection diagnostics. Freenome is an example. Nautilus is another example. They're starting to understand that they need to reach across the aisle, and instead of trying to compete with traditional drug technologies, that they partner with them. And I think they're finding success. And you could say that with smaller firms like Madrona Ventures or, Teal Capital, and all of these tech, savvy. Google Ventures, again, is starting to, be thoughtful about, reaching across the aisle. I think they're starting to get smart that there's a right way to do it. And I think we're going to see more, favorable investing coming from that sector.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think too, the media has a really strong part that they play in this, right? So to Michael's point about Haven breaking up, and then everybody was like, oh my God, healthcare is really hard. They can't do it. I think that the media gets so excited when we see some of these bigger companies coming in and making some really interesting moves in healthcare, like Verily, for example. And, it is hard. It doesn't always pan out. And just because one thing doesn't pan out too, doesn't mean it's a failure, but just because one thing does pan out doesn't mean it's a great success. And I think for some reason, reporters have this tendency to just make it seem like doom, right? Doom or gloom stuff, or, feast or famine.
Yeah.
And personally, it drives me crazy, being a communicator, because it's like, it's not that easy. And this stuff takes a lot of time, as we all know. So any tips or advice for entrepreneurs to course correct? I'm sure you guys probably see this all the time, where maybe, something isn't maybe doing exactly what they thought, and then maybe they're too scared to turn back or admit that they have to make a change. I'm curious if you have any recommendations or tips there for listeners. Chris, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, this is a basic tenet of being an entrepreneur, right? I think you got to have a vision, have some ideas, but almost every successful company is successful because they knew when to adjust, or pivot or enhance a strategy. And I think that is something we try to encourage with any of the entrepreneurs we talk to. One of the things we look for is a dose of humility, that they want to, we want them to be confident and know what their expertise is, but just a simple thing like, this is what we're thinking is the right strategy, but we always want to revisit it and we want to get outside input. What do you guys think, right? Do you think this is the right pathway? And I think that usually encourages us if they realize and know that, we might have input, we might be seeing things in the market, and that they should be prepared to alter, their, current vision for the company moving forward.
Yeah. Michael, anything to add?
So we're early stage investors, and I think more often than not, it's not that haven't identified an important market opportunity, or that they haven't, a really smart vision around product roadmap. That it is more around there's a deficiency or a gap in the team, and that's a hard message to sometimes deliver if it's actually the founder and CEO who's deficient. So having enormous self-awareness, look at other companies that are raising capital and just profile your team against that team. For us, the three most important things in any of our initial investment diligence is the team. And you can augment that with, a really engaged advisory board, or just look critically at the competency of the existing team you have. And, so that's one where we try and, when we're providing feedback, if it is around the team, this is the specific gap that we have identified that you will absolutely need in the next 6 to 18 months. You haven't shown awareness that you need it. We think you do need it. And so, I think being really reflective around the depth of the team, depth and relevance of the team. And it sounds so self-evident to say it, but, I think probably 99 out of 100 times, if we're not going to turn over more cards, it's around team issues that we just see or there's a shortcoming there.
Interesting. Steve?
Yeah, I'd say stay focused on your product market fit. Get help. Have an advisory board of people who've been there, done it before, and use it. Don't just have it on your website, actually use it and get advice and use their network. Pivot when you need to. Don't be afraid to do it. But I agree with everything else.
Great. I want to give us time to each talk about how folks can find you if needed, how you prefer for people to reach out. I know Steve mentioned earlier, it's great if somebody can make an introduction that actually knows them. But maybe, Chris, if we can start with you, what's your preferred method of contact? And then just maybe a quick overview again of kind of, what are the types of investments you're focused on right now?
Yeah, so our model is a very active management role, and we really want to be a collaborator partner, almost a shadow management team. So we're open to cold calls to folks who have a technology. They can, visit our website, www.zontogeny.com. I listed my email address in the chat for the audience. They can reach out on LinkedIn, and I'll usually accept a LinkedIn invitation, and they can then send me something, or I'll give them my email. And so we, encourage it. I mean, I think we look at a lot of stuff, and we'll be very quick to turn around initial diligence if we think it's not a fit, or it's too early, or we're not interested in the space. We'll give quick feedback. And then if we do like it, we'll usually accelerate our diligence. And if we need to put a CDA in place at that point, we can do that and really try to drive toward, a potential investment collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Steve?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Get a lot of inbound inquiries. Our website has a place where people can submit pitches. I still think the best way to do it is to find someone that that we know, and who can make the warm introduction, because that saves a lot of time.
Yeah. Michael?
I'm only doing face-to-face meetings in parking lots, as Chris knows. So no, we'd like to think that we're a service business. We are a service business, so we want to be fully accessible. It's Michael at Flare Capital, and like the others, I'm on the other platforms as well. But
Or you can find him in that parking lot in the dark corner.
Outside the Prudential.
Oh, awesome. Well, I have enjoyed chatting with you guys. Thank you all for being here and taking the time to, talk through some of these challenges we're facing in digital health. But I do feel like we've come a long way in a short amount of time.
Great. Terrific job.
Nice job, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Enjoyed it.
Cheers, guys.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Rachel. I had some questions for the panelists. I'm wondering whether, just going back on what Michael said earlier, that, more than 300 companies were funded last year, and that number would probably really increase this year as well. There are only so many providers. I know the problems are huge. There are only so many providers, so many payers. And increasingly what we hear from our reporting is that providers don't want to be working with so many different companies. They want one company that'll solve many problems for them. So maybe the question for Michael is that, you guys are investing in all these companies, you guys meaning the category of VCs, and yet there are only so many outlets. So are we setting up a lot of companies for failure, or is that just the nature of where we are right now?
I think undoubtedly, I do think we're on the threshold of a pretty dramatic consolidation, because a lot of these they either have too narrow a solution, or they have customer concentration issues. And as you go to raise your C round, that's a harder story to tell, especially if you're trying to support, a very lofty valuation. So I think we'll see a lot of private to private, which may actually be terrific. As you aggregate more competencies, you'll have presumably a more complete solution to take to market. So I do think, I think that the issue is a little worse than that. The number I cited was 372 through June of this year. There'll be several hundred companies in market, and they may all be successful, but their story is going to be a little harder to tell over time because of customer concentration and their relative narrowness of the solution. So I mean, maybe Steve or Chris see it differently, but I think there'll be a lot of private to privates.
No, those are great comments, Michael. I would just add that, for years, one of the biggest challenges to harmonize healthcare systems and information, it was a fool's errand to try to change every hospital, every healthcare system. They all had different, legacy technologies, and it just never worked. But now we're starting to see technologies come from the outside and infiltrate from the outside, where driven by consumer, by physician, by ease of gathering information. COVID has accelerated some of this, and I think that it's an easier concept, almost like you think of the social media giants, right? And how many people are on Facebook? There's not like 15 Facebooks out there, or 15 different versions of Twitter, right? And so I think that you're starting to see technologies that are going to be more adopted more broadly, and there will be losers, but the winners will win big.
So maybe Steve, then I'll put you in a spot and say, any expectations of certain consolidation that you're willing to predict today?
I don't have a specific, clinical area in mind, but just given the number of digital health startups and the funding they're getting, and I think I talked about it earlier, is it a company that can actually scale to the point where an investor gets the right kind of exit, or is it a point solution that's going to get really hot, but then needs to be part of Teladoc or American Well, right? I think that's where you're going to see, like Michael said, a lot of private to private consolidation. And I think you're also going to see the SPAC market. You've got 50 SPACs looking for healthcare targets. They've got to find companies that are in that magical $100 million revenue point. And so I think you're going to start to see the SPACs driving some consolidation as well, because they're trying to get their targets up to $100 million so they can be a successful IPO. So I think that'll also drive some of this.
Chris, I saw a twinkle in your eye when I asked that prediction question to Steve. I bet you have some predictions.
No, I actually, the twinkle was because I'm so glad Steve was the one who was pegged as the prognosticator, because I wouldn't want to go there personally.
Well, it was absolutely wonderful having you guys on and, talking about this really important topic. There's so much money going in. Entrepreneurs need to prove themselves. And it's more work for us as we try to keep pace of the business and how entrepreneurs are innovating. So thank you so much to Rachel, to Chris, to Steve, and to Michael. It's absolutely great to have you on, and hope we'll see each other in person sometime soon.